The story begins by shedding light on a deeply ingrained and corrupt system operating in small towns, where the justice system targets black men, wrongfully arresting them as a means of generating profit. This system, which has been running unchecked for years, exploits racial biases and the vulnerability of marginalized communities to maintain its hold on power. The small town of Ridgefield is a microcosm of this larger issue, where law enforcement officers, the judicial system, and local officials have been working in concert to profit from fabricated arrests, wrongful convictions, and the manipulation of law for personal gain. The officers, once entrusted to protect and serve, have now become enforcers of a machine that thrives on criminalizing innocent individuals. The pattern is clear. Black men are arrested for minor or non-existent infractions, their records tainted, and their lives disrupted. These men, often caught in a cycle of racial profiling and unjust incarceration, become just another number in the system, a number that, when locked behind bars, contributes to the private prison industry's bottom line. Ridgefield's police department, led by corrupt officers like Officer Henry Langston and Officer Dean Brooks, has become notorious for these unjust practices. Their actions are systematic and deliberate, designed to maximize arrests and increase the town's revenue from federal grants tied to crime rates. It's not just about policing, it's about control and profit. The officers plant evidence, make false reports, and ensure that their quotas are met by targeting vulnerable individuals, most often people of color. However, the system begins to crack when Nathaniel Turner, a well-known civil rights attorney, is wrongfully arrested on a quiet street in Ridgefield. Nathaniel, a man accustomed to the prejudices of law enforcement, immediately realizes something is off. What begins as another routine arrest for the officers, another victim added to their growing list, takes a turn when Nathaniel's family steps into the picture. He isn't just any ordinary man. His brother is a powerful figure within the legal world, an attorney general with a wealth of influence and the resources to challenge the very system that has oppressed him for years. Nathaniel's arrest, something the officers believe will be just another typical case, becomes the catalyst for exposing the truth. When his brother is contacted, it doesn't take long for the corruption within Ridgefield's justice system to unravel. What they had failed to recognize was that Nathaniel Turner was no ordinary target, and the corrupt practices that had remained hidden for so long were about to be exposed. This case would ignite a reckoning that no one in Ridgefield, or beyond, could ignore. Darius Carter, a successful and composed man in his early 40s, was accustomed to handling high-pressure situations. A prominent corporate lawyer, he carried himself with the self-assurance of someone who had earned his position through hard work and determination. On this particular day, he was driving through Mill Creek, a small town on his way to a nearby city, navigating unfamiliar roads as he followed the shortcut suggested by his GPS. The sun hung low in the sky, casting long shadows across the quiet town, as Darius's sleek black sedan hummed along the winding streets. As he approached a small gas station to refuel, Darius's mind wandered to the successful pitch meeting he had just completed. He replayed the conversation in his head, mentally noting the strategies he discussed and how well the meeting had gone. Pulling up to Pump 4, he stepped out of the car and approached the station's front door, aware of the late afternoon stillness that seemed to hang in the air. However, the moment he entered the station, he couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. The clerk behind the counter eyed him a bit too closely, and the air was thick with unspoken tension. Darius proceeded with his usual calm, pulling out his platinum card to pay for the fuel. "You passing through?" the clerk, a scruffy man with a patchy beard, asked with an edge in his voice, clearly sizing him up. "Yes, just need to fuel up and I'll be on my way," Darius replied, maintaining his usual professionalism. But the clerk's suspicious tone had set off a warning in his mind. As he left the station, preparing to get back on the road, Darius felt the sting of eyes on him. Before he could reach his car, 2 police officers appeared, their hands resting on their belts in a way that suggested they had already made an assessment. Officer Langley, a middle-aged man with a hardened face, stepped forward. "Sir, step out of the car," Officer Langley commanded, his tone sharp. Darius, confused but maintaining his composure, responded calmly, "I've just checked my lights this morning. Everything's fine." Officer Decker, standing beside Langley, didn't seem to care about Darius's explanation. "We need to see your ID," Decker demanded, his voice tinged with suspicion. Darius knew what was happening. He had been stopped before, but something about this interaction felt different. He was being treated with skepticism, as if his mere presence in the town had triggered a deeper suspicion. With a calm voice, Darius answered, "I'm just here to fuel up and get back on the road. I haven't done anything wrong." Despite his clear demeanor, the officers weren't backing down. Their questioning continued with an air of quiet hostility, and it became clear to Darius that this was more than just a routine stop, it was a deliberate move to escalate the situation. Darius's heart began to race, but he stayed calm, knowing that the stakes were much higher than the officers realized. The tension in the air grew thicker as Officer Langley moved closer, his posture now aggressive. Darius could feel the subtle shift in the officer's demeanor, and his instincts told him that this was no ordinary stop. They were questioning him with more urgency, more suspicion, despite his calm, cooperative responses. His gut told him this was more about who he was than what he was doing. He had seen the way people often reacted to a well-dressed black man in the wrong neighborhood, judgment masked as concern. Darius, refusing to let the situation escalate, raised his hand slightly, signaling his intention to step back. "I'll step away if you want," he said, his voice steady, not showing an ounce of fear. He took a careful step back from the car, hoping to de-escalate the situation, but instead of retreating, Officer Langley moved in closer, his hand now resting on the baton at his side. This was not the way a routine stop was supposed to go, Darius thought. He'd handled himself professionally, answered their questions, and had every right to be on the road. Yet here he was, being treated like a criminal. "Step out of the car, now," Officer Langley barked, his voice hardening, with a dismissiveness that hinted at something more insidious than routine procedure. Darius knew better than to argue. "I told you, I've checked everything. I'm just trying to go home," he said, keeping his tone calm and firm, but something about Langley's aggression told him it was only going to get worse. He had been in enough tense situations to recognize when things were spiraling. This wasn't about a traffic violation anymore. This was about a predetermined narrative they were trying to impose on him. Without warning, Langley grabbed Darius's arm, twisting it behind his back with unexpected force. The sharp pain shot through Darius's shoulder, but he kept his face neutral, refusing to show the officers that their actions were having the desired effect. Before he could react further, Officer Decker, who had been quietly observing, stepped forward and helped restrain him, adding to the pressure. Everything happened in a blur, the tightening cuffs, the rough handling, and the realization that he was now being treated as a criminal. As Darius was forced to the ground, a bystander who had been watching the scene unfold began recording the incident. His words, muttered into the camera, rang in Darius's ears, "This is messed up." For a brief moment, Darius held on to the hope that the video might capture the truth, that it might show the world what was happening, but for now, he was powerless. He was being dragged away from the car, away from his freedom, and his thoughts turned to his family, to the life he had worked so hard for. None of it mattered now. He was just another black man in the wrong place at the wrong time, and it seemed no amount of success could protect him from the system. Darius sat in the small, cold holding cell, the fluorescent lights overhead buzzing incessantly. The harsh shadows from the lights made the room feel smaller, suffocating him with an overwhelming sense of time dragging on. His mind raced through the events of the day. What had started as a routine drive through Mill Creek had spiraled into a nightmare. The officers, Langley and Decker, had treated him like a criminal, despite his calm demeanor and cooperation. The unfairness of it all pressed on him, but he remained determined not to let it break his spirit. He needed to stay focused. He needed to make the right call. Finally, the door to the holding cell creaked open, and Officer Langley, his demeanor now even colder, stepped in. "You get one call," he muttered, unlocking the door to let Darius out. Darius felt a mix of frustration and relief. He knew this phone call was his lifeline, the one chance he had to turn things around. As Darius walked toward the phone, he couldn't help but notice the officers' behavior. Their smug expressions had faded, replaced with a certain nervous energy. Something was different now, though Darius couldn't yet put his finger on it. Still, he focused on the task at hand. The phone call. He picked up the receiver, dialed the number with steady hands, and waited. It only took a few rings before a familiar, authoritative voice answered. "Darius? Is everything okay?" Jordan Carter, his older brother, asked, his voice filled with concern. "I'm fine," Darius replied, trying to keep his tone steady, but there was an unmistakable tremor of urgency. "Listen, I've been arrested. They've got me in Mill Creek, and they're accusing me of something I didn't do. They've been holding me without cause, and I need you to help." The words seemed to hit Jordan like a punch in the gut, but he kept his composure. "What's going on, Darius?" Jordan's voice had a steel edge to it now. "They're claiming I resisted arrest." "I haven't done anything wrong," Darius said, trying to keep his tone even, but the frustration was hard to mask. "But it's worse than that, Jordan. These cops, there's something off about them. I'm not just some random guy they pulled over. This whole town's got a system in place, and they've been getting away with it for years." There was a moment of silence on the other end of the line before Jordan spoke, his voice now measured and resolute. "I'm coming for you. Stay calm, Darius. I'm going to make sure this doesn't go any further. No one messes with my family." Darius's heart skipped a beat. He knew Jordan's position as the U.S. Attorney General carried weight, but hearing the certainty in his brother's voice made everything feel different. His brother wasn't just the nation's top prosecutor, he was the person who could tear this entire system apart. It was then that Darius realized how big this moment was. His arrest wasn't just a case of injustice against him, it was the beginning of unraveling a much larger, deeply entrenched system of corruption. Jordan's arrival in Mill Creek marked a seismic shift in the investigation. As the U.S. Attorney General, his involvement was enough to make even the most corrupt officers in the station uneasy. When he arrived at the local police station, the atmosphere changed from one of cocky disregard to palpable tension. His reputation preceded him. This wasn't just a local matter anymore. Jordan had already begun making calls, and soon federal investigators were pouring in, ready to dig deeper into the network of corruption that had operated unchecked for years. Jordan's first move was to have Darius released immediately. The charges against him were flimsy at best, but the longer Darius stayed in that cell, the harder it would be to uncover the truth. As Darius walked out of the station, his eyes met those of the officers who had wrongfully arrested him. There was no smugness in their gaze now, only fear. Darius knew their time was running out. Once Darius was safely out of the station, Jordan called for a full investigation into the Mill Creek Police Department. The more they dug, the clearer the picture became. At first, it was just a matter of questionable arrests, racial profiling, and overzealous policing. But as Jordan and Darius combed through records, witness statements, and other evidence, they found a much more insidious system at play. Darius had suspected it all along. The small town wasn't just targeting black men for minor infractions. They were building a profitable racket based on false arrests, fabricated evidence, and coerced confessions. Judges, too, were complicit in this conspiracy, rubber-stamping questionable convictions in exchange for kickbacks. The local judicial system was not only corrupt, but it had become a carefully orchestrated machine designed to imprison the poor and the marginalized, all in the name of profit. The more Jordan uncovered, the deeper the rabbit hole went. There were spreadsheets tracking quotas for arrests, false drug seizures, and a system that incentivized wrongful convictions. The officers were just the foot soldiers in a much larger operation, one that involved corrupt judges, local politicians, and even private prison companies. Every new document they found revealed another layer of this web of corruption. The scope of the conspiracy was mind-boggling, and Darius's wrongful arrest was just the tip of the iceberg. With each discovery, it became clear, the entire criminal justice system in Mill Creek was broken, and the people who had been running it were willing to do anything to protect their profits. Now, with Jordan's resources and Darius's determination, they were going to bring it all to light, and tear it down from the inside out. The investigation into Mill Creek's corruption had gained unstoppable momentum, thanks to Darius, his brother Jordan, and the relentless team of federal agents assigned to the case. What had started as an individual wrongfully arrested had now turned into a full-scale operation aimed at uncovering one of the most insidious systems of abuse within the justice system. Darius and Jordan knew that the truth wouldn't come easily, but with every layer they peeled back, more horrifying revelations emerged. The duo worked closely with Special Agent Mitchell and a team of investigators, each new lead uncovering the intricate web of corruption. As the evidence stacked up, it became clear, this wasn't just about a few crooked officers. This was a deeply embedded system involving law enforcement, local judges, and private prison companies, an entire network built on exploitation and racial profiling. They discovered a series of spreadsheets detailing arrest quotas, with officers rewarded for generating more arrests, particularly for minor, nonviolent crimes. These quotas were used to fill private prisons, where the incarcerated individuals were often subject to poor living conditions and forced labor. The system was rigged, with every arrest contributing to an unholy profit machine. Local judges were complicit too, rubber-stamping fraudulent arrest reports and guilty verdicts to ensure that the prison quotas were met, all the while receiving financial incentives in exchange for their cooperation. What disturbed Darius and Jordan even more was the blatant racial profiling embedded in the system. Black and Latino individuals were disproportionately targeted, arrested, and convicted. The racial bias wasn't just incidental, it was calculated, systemic, and profitable. Darius had long suspected that something far more insidious was at work, but seeing it documented in spreadsheets, arrest records, and testimonies was something else entirely. Federal agents began raiding key locations, offices, courtrooms, even private prison facilities, all of which were tied to the corrupt operation. The scope of the conspiracy began to unfold, revealing not only local officials but also connections to state and even federal politicians who had been turning a blind eye to the systematic abuse. As the investigation deepened, the pressure from corrupt officials to stop the progress intensified. But Darius and Jordan stood firm, knowing that they were not only seeking justice for the wrongfully arrested but also for the countless others who had been exploited by a system that had failed them. The battle was just beginning, but it was one they were determined to win. With every piece of evidence they uncovered, the walls of corruption were starting to crumble, and the truth was finally coming to light. The operation was in full swing, and the wheels of justice were beginning to turn faster than ever. Darius, Jordan, and the team of federal agents had uncovered a network of corruption so vast that it stretched from the streets of Mill Creek to the highest echelons of local government. What started as an isolated incident of racial profiling and wrongful arrest had turned into a multi-jurisdictional operation targeting the very foundation of systemic abuse. Federal agents, led by Special Agent Mitchell, executed a series of simultaneous raids across Mill Creek. The operation's scope was massive, and its reach was far wider than anyone had initially anticipated. Law enforcement officers, local judges, and even influential politicians, all of them had been complicit in maintaining a system designed to profit from false arrests, wrongful convictions, and the exploitation of private prisons. As the raids unfolded, the corrupt officials involved began to realize just how deeply they had miscalculated. Darius watched from his vantage point as the first few arrests were made. Officers Langley and Decker, once smug and untouchable, were now being led away in handcuffs, their faces drained of color as they passed by the agents. Their criminal actions were no longer hidden behind their badges. Darius felt a rush of vindication but knew that this was only the beginning. Each arrest revealed another layer of the conspiracy, with names of powerful figures in local politics, judiciary, and law enforcement all surfacing. The full extent of the operation was breathtaking. Judges who had been routinely rubber-stamping fraudulent arrest reports, sending innocent people to prison for the sake of profit, were arrested alongside the officers who had carried out the illegal arrests. The network extended further than anyone had imagined, with evidence pointing to a vast operation designed to manipulate the justice system for financial gain. What had initially been about private prisons quickly revealed itself to be a web of corruption involving everything from political favors to illicit financial transactions. With each passing hour, more arrests were made, and more names were added to the growing list of those implicated in the conspiracy. The media swarmed as the scale of the scandal became clearer. News outlets across the country began reporting on the massive corruption network, shedding light on the intricate ways in which law enforcement, judges, and politicians had worked together to perpetuate injustice. But even as the arrests continued, Darius and Jordan knew that there was still more to uncover. The fight was far from over, and they were determined to see it through to the end. The battle for justice had only just begun. As the investigation continued to unfold, Darius and Jordan realized they were not just dealing with a few corrupt officers or judges. The corruption stretched far beyond Mill Creek, revealing a sprawling network of injustice. What had started as a wrongful arrest was now a deep dive into systemic racism, the exploitation of the vulnerable, and the profiteering off human lives. The more they uncovered, the clearer it became that the corrupt officials were merely the surface of a much larger, more insidious operation. The network was far-reaching, involving private prison companies, politicians, law enforcement officers, and even corporate entities that profited from the very system that had targeted people like Darius. Darius sat across from Jordan, their faces tense with the weight of what they had discovered. In front of them, piles of documents and digital files were spread across the table, each piece a new clue, a new thread to follow. The magnitude of the corruption was overwhelming, and it seemed that every time they thought they had reached the end, another layer was revealed. They had already uncovered evidence showing that private prisons were not just filling their cells with wrongfully convicted individuals, they were actively participating in the arrests, bribing officers and judges to meet quotas for prisoners. the system of racial profiling, where innocent black men were disproportionately targeted, had become a well-oiled machine. The private prison contracts relied on these false arrests to meet the demand for cheap labor, further cementing the system's power and influence. The links to powerful figures were becoming more apparent. High-ranking politicians, once thought to be untouchable, were named in documents and financial transactions as part of the scheme to maintain the flow of prisoners into private facilities. Judges had been complicit, accepting bribes and looking the other way while innocent people were locked away, their futures destroyed for profit. As they dug deeper, Darius and Jordan came across a damning set of emails connecting these figures to the criminal activities. The powerful elite had been protecting each other for years, ensuring that the exploitation continued unchecked. But with each discovery, the walls began to close in on them. What had started as a small-town issue was now a national crisis, and the investigation was about to expose one of the darkest secrets in American justice. Darius, though shaken by the scale of what they were up against, remained resolute. The truth was out now, and there was no going back. With Jordan's help and the federal agents working tirelessly behind the scenes, they would tear down this corrupt system, no matter how deeply entrenched it was. The fight for justice had reached a tipping point, and Darius was determined to see it through to the end. As the investigation into the massive corruption grew, so did the desperate attempts by the powerful figures behind it to cover their tracks. Darius and Jordan quickly realized that they were not only up against corrupt law enforcement officers, judges, and politicians but also a system willing to go to extreme lengths to protect its secrets. The stakes were higher now, and the fight had escalated into a battle not just for justice but for survival. The first signs of resistance came in the form of blatant attempts to destroy evidence. Key documents disappeared from secure servers, and computer systems were mysteriously wiped. Files containing incriminating data vanished, and several high-ranking officials who had been involved in the racket began to distance themselves from the investigation, denying any knowledge of the scheme they had been a part of for so long. But these attempts to bury the truth only fueled the movement. As the authorities closed in on the corrupt network, the system's actions grew more frantic and violent. Witnesses who had previously cooperated with the investigation began to receive threatening messages, and several were even silenced under suspicious circumstances. It was clear that the corrupt officials had too much to lose, and they would stop at nothing to protect their empire of injustice. Despite these efforts to intimidate and obstruct, the investigation continued to gain momentum. Public outrage began to swell as more and more people learned of the widespread corruption. Darius's wrongful arrest, the catalyst that had exposed the rot at the heart of Mill Creek, had ignited something bigger. His calm and unwavering resolve in the face of adversity made him the symbol of the fight for justice, and his case was now the focal point of a national outcry. Jordan, ever the strategist, worked tirelessly to build the case, linking the actions of corrupt law enforcement officers and judges to the broader system of racial profiling and private prison profiteering. The federal agents, now fully invested in the case, were relentless in their pursuit, sifting through the mountains of evidence and connecting the dots between local and national figures. With every passing day, the truth was becoming harder to suppress. The news media, once cautious of challenging the powerful figures involved, now reported the story with fervor, exposing the truth to the world. The investigation, born out of one man's wrongful arrest, had grown into a national movement, and Darius found himself at the center of it all, not just as a victim but as the driving force behind a new wave of accountability. Though the corrupt forces were fighting back, Darius's fight for justice had only just begun. And with every piece of evidence that surfaced, the inevitable collapse of the system grew closer. The truth was no longer something they could hide, it was coming to light, piece by piece, and the public was demanding answers. The battle was far from over, but the tide was turning, and the corrupt network was crumbling under the weight of its own lies. The story of Darius Carter's wrongful arrest and the systemic corruption that followed serves as a powerful reminder of the deep-rooted issues within our justice system. It teaches us that standing up against injustice requires more than just a fight for personal vindication. It's a battle that can unravel decades of systemic wrongdoing. In the face of adversity, Darius's resilience and the support of his family illuminate the importance of standing firm for what is right. Corruption thrives when it goes unchecked, but when truth is uncovered, no matter how deeply buried, it has the power to ignite widespread change. The story reminds us that each person's actions, no matter how seemingly small, can lead to monumental shifts in society. When individuals rise against systemic injustice, they can dismantle the structures that profit from oppression and exploitation. Darius's journey is a call for us to be vigilant, to seek accountability, and to hold those in power accountable for their actions. If you found this story impactful, please take a moment to like, subscribe, and hit the notification bell to support the channel. Your support helps keep these stories alive, spreading the message of justice and accountability to everyone.